Dr. Emma Sawyer, Chair of the Governance Commission, Honorable Axel Addy, Minister of Commerce and Industry, Dr. Emma Dennis, President of the University of Liberia, other officials of government, partners in progress, representatives of the private sector, the media, distinguished participants. Good afternoon to all of you. I would like foremost to congratulate the organizers of this symposium and say that I regret not to be able to be there with you all as much as I would have liked to. And therefore, I am pleased to be able to participate in this symposium through the medium of this video. For those who do not know me, let me say a few words as to who I am and where I'm coming from. Olubanke King Akirele, or Banke as many of you know me, former Minister of Foreign Affairs, former Minister of Commerce and Industry of the Republic of Liberia. Prior to this, I come from 25 years of international development service with the UN system, specifically UNDP, where I served as resident representative and resident coordinator in a number of countries, Mauritius, Seychelles, Zambia, and then in charge of what we call the crisis countries of Rwanda, Burundi, DRC, Central African Republic, and Congo-Brazzaville and Congo-Kinshasa, in charge of East and Central Africa, as well as one of 8 managing directors at UNIDO, United Nations Industrial Development Organization, and the only African occupying that particular post. The paper I'm presenting to you today is basically a precursor to a more in-depth research that is underway. It is meant to be provocative because the issues at bay are serious issues which we Liberians neglect at our peril. It calls on Liberians to stop focusing only on politics and to see what is happening in the economy, for Liberians to reclaim our inheritance and our space. Hence the title, Taking Charge of Our Destiny, Lessons for Liberians from Other Models of Empowerment of Nationals in the Economy. In July 2012, at a forum that was part of the Independence Day celebrations of the Liberian Embassy in Washington, D.C., I gave the keynote address. It was entitled, Guarding Our Inheritance, Preserving Our Space, Enhancing Our Future. The essence of that address, which is annexed to this presentation, was and remains that if Liberians do not preserve the space, if we do not guard our inheritance, if we do not stop fronting for others, and if we do not stop putting personal interests ahead of national interests, we'll find ourselves onlookers in our own country, while every other nationality takes control and we content ourselves with politics, which over time has tended to be the bane of our country. That is the Achilles heel. This paper is a follow-up to that discourse. Indeed, some 35 plus years ago, in his book, Cry, Liberia, Cry, the late G. Henry Andrews, former Minister of Information during President Talbot's administration, lamented the fact that our economy was controlled by foreigners, commerciants and traders at the time. I understand that he got into trouble for that with government. Today, however, Madam President herself, both at her July 2006 commencement address at Cuddington and in her January 2014 annual address to the national legislature, addressed the seriousness of the issues and her determination to take action. In Cuttington, in July 2006, Madam President said, and I quote, "Let the message go out to all that in time we will change this, that is, foreign domination of the Liberian economy. Liberians will once again take charge of their commerce. Liberians will take charge of their destiny." The inspiration for this paper. Then, in January 2014, the State of the Nation address to the national legislation, Madam President provided government's planned response to some of the challenges faced by local entrepreneurs, namely that foremost guidelines are being prepared for scrupulous implementation of government's decision to direct 25% of public procurement of goods and services to Liberian businesses, which amounts to access to millions of dollars in public procurement opportunities. Secondly, assistance by the Liberian Innovation Fund for entrepreneurs in joint support from the budget and LBDI and other measures being under consideration. Essentially, my paper calls attention to other models of empowerment of nationals in their economy. It draws lessons therefrom for post-conflict Liberia, with concrete proposals if meaningful transformation is to be achieved in the country. This, against the backdrop of Vision 2030, against also Liberia's agenda for transformation, and of the Common African Position, the CAP, for the post-2015 development agenda. This symposium is clearly an effort to move forward on those indications by Madam President by adopting a Liberian entrepreneur empowerment and development strategy, a bold approach to national participation. But since we have seen earlier efforts over the years, it is essential that this time we succeed. My paper basically provides insight into approaches from other countries to empower their nationals in their economy. The idea is to provide lessons for meaningful Liberian participation and empowerment in their economy. The underlying motivation behind this paper is as follows. What legacies will this, our generation, leave for the next generation of Liberians? It is directed to each and every Liberian. The question is directed to each and every Liberian, private citizen, civil society, and government. The late and former Vice President Green, upon taking over the mantle of leadership, said, "The problem with Liberians is us." That statement remains as valid for today as it was when he uttered it in the 70s. Despite the destruction of our society that occurred over 14 years of civil crisis, we have sat down and let others take control of our economy. Many of our surveyors, many of our lawyers, we ourselves have not done enough to preserve our dignity as a people and guard our inheritance. Others have come, and they are still coming. We sign unconscionable lease agreements of 40, 60, 80, and even 100 years, I'm told, for pittance. The lessees laugh at us because we settle for 20, 30, 50 or 250,000 for 80 to 100 years in advance. Most of our people being completely oblivious of the time value of money. Indeed, I was pleased to read recently that Kenneth Best, at the recent Cuttington University graduation, took issues with this very item. I am sure that earlier presenters and panelists have covered many of the challenges to be addressed through SMEs financing and micro-lending towards giving Liberians a stake in the economy. I will therefore not touch that dimension. However, I would like to recall, for those who are not aware, of our efforts to empower Liberians in the economy, notwithstanding the backlash from Liberians themselves, when I was Minister of Commerce and Industry. Liberians who, by and large, were still locked into a mindset that has kept us where we are today. Amongst these were the famous rice saga in the wake of attempted economic sabotage at the very beginning of this government, that notwithstanding, when I left the ministry in September 2007, there were, for the first time in the history of Liberia, 6 importers of our staple food, 5 of whom were Liberians. I do not know the situation today. There was empowerment of Liberians down the distribution value chain in Margibi, Habel, and Kakata, through arrangements for revolving loans with Ecobank for Liberians retailers to the tune of some $250,000, Liberian rice retailers. Then there were the microloans we made available through the matching grant scheme with Ecobank for Liberians in Buchanan, Ganta, and Harper. There was the empowerment of LPMC for rice imports. This was done with the assistance of Central Bank of Liberia. There was empowerment of small-scale Liberian entrepreneurs for exports through matching grant from Coca-Cola Africa and Ecobank for a total of $100,000. There was also the grooming of young Liberian entrepreneurs who, after a period of assignments with Liberian businesses, would receive grants for setting up of their own businesses. This we did in concert with the University of Liberia and the Liberian Business Association. All these have been highlighted in my book under the chapter Commerce Under Siege in the book entitled Women's Leadership in Post-Conflict Liberia, published in May 2012. Subsequently, as Minister of Foreign Affairs, we continued to be very concerned about this issue of empowerment of Liberians in our economy. We submitted a proposal in June 2010 to Cabinet on the sales of Cimenco shares and how we could maximize Liberians' participation and gave them a stake in the economy. That paper is also annexed. This was in June 2010. Finally, my presentation is situated against the backdrop of the Common Africa position on the post-2012 development agenda, released in Liberia a few weeks ago by Madam President. It may be recalled that at the time, Madam President called on Liberians to take a serious look at the content of the CAP and see how our national strategies are similar or different, and how we can view the document as a roadmap to development. I quote here, In order to transform our societies and the African Union's Vision 2063, in order to realize that vision, she said we must go through a true transformational process, a new agenda for development, a new approach that reflects and restructures old models. As such, it is against this backdrop of Pillar 6, finance and partnerships, where emphasis is placed, amongst others, on improving domestic resource mobilization, maximizing innovative financing and partnership, as well as Pillar 1, economic transformation, structural economic transformation, and inclusive growth, that our paper is situated and should be viewed. These insights are drawn from Botswana, Rwanda, Namibia, Ghana, Nigeria, and Malaysia. While not comprehensive, what we do is to highlight critical aspects from those countries. In the case of Rwanda, the issues with lessons for Liberia include, foremost, their diaspora investment policy and conditions to facilitate this. Issues of equity participation in foreign direct investment, investment of their pension funds in overseas businesses for revenue generation stream, issues of accountability and transparency, and in their case, the concept of a presidential advisory council that consists of foreign business entities in addition to nationals. In the case of Botswana, Botswana's experience with equity participation in its mining industry sector, issue of loans to nationals through the Botswana Development Bank. In Namibia, there they have differential interest rates by the Development Bank compared to that of the commercial banks. And then they have extended timeline before beginning to repay loans by nationals. In the case of Nigeria, we want simply here to highlight the fact there is a central bank policy that 10% of all commercial banks loans to SMEs to encourage their development. In the case of Ghana, its oil and gas industry requirement and provision for local content is of particular relevance for Liberia at this point in time. There, for example, the leading independent oil and gas exploration group, Tullow Oil, with the Ministry of Energy, plans to set up a training center in Takoradi to train local private sector for winning bids from international petroleum and service companies, an approach which could be piggybacked on by NOCAL in the Liberian case. Then Ghana's reservation of certain businesses for their nationals. Section 27(1) of the Ghana Investment Promotion Center Act 2003 identifies activities reserved for Ghanaians and Ghanaian-owned enterprises, while Section 27(2) identifies enterprises for foreign participation and minimum foreign capital requirement. In the case of Malaysia, we are aware of provisions for empowerment of their nationals, such that large companies who may win major contracts have a requirement for ensuring that some of the smaller companies participate in some of those contracts. I think this is an area of particular interest because it basically is realizing the fact that the smaller companies need an opportunity to improve on their capacities, and through the empowerment and association with the largest company, they can get up to par, so to speak. in light of experiences indicated, if we are to realize a true transformation and attain middle income status with Liberians in the driving seat. If Liberians are to take charge of their destiny, we must come up with a roadmap with benchmarks and indicators through to 2030. We must start during the period of the Agenda for Transformation, the 5-year plan towards realization of Vision 2030 with the following. Foremost, change the model of foreign direct investment such that there must be a certain proportion of equity participation, ranging from a minimum of 25 to 30% up to X amount to be determined. In this regard, companies' participation in the economic zones, in the planned economic zones of the National Investment Commission, must require Liberians' participation. Issue of source of capital for this Liberian participation to engage in equity investment must be identified. I propose a combination of NASCAP, Central Bank of Liberia, and NOCAL to set up a fund that will facilitate such investment to be expected. The details can be worked out. Let me take this opportunity to say that I was on the ground floor in the planning of the National Social Security and Welfare Corporation. I'm therefore very much aware and acquainted with the fact that the investments, and here we want to commend the management of NASCAP for the recent completion and dedication of that extraordinary Social Security building that has been set up recently and was dedicated by the President. We are aware that it is expected that the investment to bring to revenue generation, and in addition, therefore, to investment in buildings, commercial property, investment could also be applied to helping to set up a fund from which equity participation could be accessed. Then there is a need for us to relook at local content in the oil and gas industry as regards Liberians benefiting from the logistical base for serving that industry. We could think in terms of a public-private partnership, empowering and developing the capacity of Liberian SMEs to participate effectively in the industry. The experience from Ghana can be drawn upon here. To implement an effective local content for us in Liberia, it becomes very important to review what constitutes Liberian business. To effectively implement this local content, we will have to relook at what constitutes a Liberian firm. Do all firms, businesses organized or incorporated under the laws of Liberia qualify as local, even though many may be owned by foreigners holding majority shares? What will stop foreigners from coming en masse to Liberia and establishing companies overnight so that they can benefit under the local content laws? How do we stop Liberians from fronting for foreigners? How do we stop capital flight once again? How will Liberians compete if once again they are pushed at the bottom for loans and opportunities? These are some of the issues we have to explore in terms of ensuring that the local contact and its objectives for empowerment, employment of Liberians, stopping of capital flight really takes effect. Another measure we propose is setting up of an ombudsman for economic empowerment of Liberians to be lodged in the office of the Vice President. The concerned individual would be jointly designated by government of Liberia and the private sector. The said Secretariat of the Ombudsman would operate with an Ombudsman Advisory Committee modeled on the Presidential Advisory Committee of Rwanda, in this case consisting of both outsiders and Liberians, expertise from countries that have aggressively promoted their nationals' ownership and equity investments. We then proposed 6, active engagement with the diaspora and utilization of diaspora bonds, as is done in Israel, in Ethiopia, and in India. Finally, we need to have a serious review of the unconscionable lease agreements that we have in Liberia. Issue of capital flight and non-citizens' growing ownership of properties in the country and action thereto. This is absolutely critical to protect Liberia's inheritance and guard their space, bearing in mind the legacy for future generations of Liberians. As I close, I want to invite others to participate in our work on a review of these lease agreements. It is necessary for Liberians to seriously consider what we are doing as we sign these agreements. We do anticipate some further work on this under the auspices of the Liberian Institute for Growing Patriotism as a combined output of its subcommittee on economic empowerment of Liberians, which I chair, and the Law and Governance Subcommittee chaired by Councillor Yvette Chesenbrea. In closing, ladies and gentlemen, the onus is on us as Liberians. I have presented some concrete way forward of where and of places where it is working. If we are indeed to take charge of our destiny, then we must be prepared to take the next steps that we need to do to take our country to the next level. Among those steps are issues of accountability and transparency, putting away fronting, taking interests of Liberia ahead of personal interests. The question I leave us with is what will be the legacy of this generation for future generation? That is what should guide us. The responsibility is ours. It is not only government, it is all of ours. We must have this as our mission. Let me, as I close, recall the words of the famous Frantz Fanon, the Algerian nationalist, who said, "Each generation must discover its mission, fulfill it or betray it in relative opacity." Ladies and gentlemen, what will be our stand? What will be our stand? Will we fulfill our mission? Will this generation of Liberians fulfill its mission? Or will we betray it? I thank you.